Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City of Barrie's Cycle Barrie Infrastructure Program Public Information Center. We're pleased to have everyone here with us this evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us to hear about this exciting project. For everyone's information, this webinar is being recorded. So we'll be posting the recording of this video up onto the project website, and we'll be sharing that website with you as we go through the project here today. So my name is Justin Jones. I'm the engagement coordinator for this project, and I'm going to be kind of your master of ceremonies for this evening. And I just wanted to kick us off by starting off with our land acknowledgement from the City of Barrie. So we acknowledge that the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, which include the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. We also acknowledge the Wendat Nation, the Hurons, who occupied these lands prior to the middle of the 17th century. We're dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous people on this land. We are committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Just for everyone's information, we are running this as a webinar on Zoom this evening. What that means in practical terms is that your microphone will be muted for the duration of the presentation. Cameras will be automatically turned off for all attendees. So if you do have a question or you'd like to make a comment at the end of our session, we will have the opportunity for you to use the raise hand function if you're unable to submit your question via the Q&A function. So we would prefer that you submit your questions using the Q&A tool on the Zoom webinar, because in that way we have a written record of the questions that were asked, and we can provide a written response that can be posted to the project website to improve transparency and accountability. So if you could please preferentially use the Q&A tool, but we will have some space at the end of the session for any verbal questions as needed. If we are not, if we have time after getting through the questions that have been submitted in writing, our preference will be to get through those questions in writing first. So the agenda for today is we're going to start off with introductions. We're going to introduce our project team, both from our consulting firm at WSP and from the City of Barrie. We're going to tell you a little bit about what we're doing. So the network that we're proposing, the facility types, the gap analysis that we're talking about, the intensification corridors, and then moving on to the education and encouragement program that's going to be part of this project as we go forward. And we'll wrap it up with a little bit of information about next steps and where we're going. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our project manager, Dave McLaughlin, to provide some introductions and some information about the project. Dave?
Thanks, Justin, and welcome everyone. Before we start, I'd like to first pass over to our client. So if you would like to introduce yourself, Brett, on behalf of the city, that would be ideal.
Yep, thanks, Dave. Hello, everybody. My name is Brett Graytrix. I'm the Senior Project Manager in Transportation Planning and the branch lead. Thank you for spending your time with us tonight. It's an exciting project. We're happy to have WSP on board with us to help us through this process. They have specialized skills in active transportation and are known in the industry as leaders. So I'll pass this back on to Dave. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. So I'm Dave McLaughlin. I lead WSP Canada's National Active Transportation Planning and Design Practice, and I'm the project manager for this assignment, supporting City of Barrie staff and Brett. And also with us this evening is Sandy Yang. Sandy, if you could introduce yourself.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Sandy Yang. I'm a transportation planner with WSP, and I'll be helping with technical aspects of this project. So happy to be here tonight.
Thanks, Sandy. As you can see on the screen, we have a number of other people who are part of our team, and including our illustrious leader, Justin Jones. Over to you, Justin.
Thanks, Dave. So what we'd like to talk about this evening is just a little bit about the city's cycling network and the recommendations from the Transportation Master Plan And so in addition to kind of introducing myself here, I just wanted to mention that WSP was the organization that wrote the TMP. And so I'm going to let Dave explain the TMP and the context of the city's cycling program here.
Fabulous. So this project that we're doing builds upon the recently approved transportation master plan that Barrie has. It has a big focus on active transportation, thinking about how best to improve pedestrian and cycling infrastructure as new projects are designed or rehabbed or resurfaced. So that's a key part of thinking about how to implement active transportation infrastructure. The desire is to develop a more connected and complete network, and the city would like to do it at a quicker pace and not just wait for when they reconstruct certain roadways. So part of this initial exercise is to identify those roads and corridors where we can make adjustments through pavement marking changes, i.e. when the road is resurfaced or repainted, and signage to implement facilities. Next plot, next please. So some of the core objectives are quick wins, which is really building upon the TMP, looking for opportunities where Barrie could implement cycling infrastructure sooner. And you'll see a lot of that happening over the next year. It also is a quick win network, which is focused on signed routes, leveraging existing road right-of-ways and low stress streets. The intention in the initial exercise is not to reconstruct streets, but that will be part of future endeavors. And we'll get into that a little bit more detail in today's presentation. Next. So what are we doing? So on the left, or at my left, you'll see there are 4 key streams of this current assignment. Network development and design, which is really about the quick wins we talked about, over 20 kilometers of roads where there'll be adjustments to pavement markings and new signage, the addition of bike lanes and buffered bike lanes, and those are nearing completion in design and will be tendered through the city, and you'll start seeing those being implemented over the next year or two. A network gap analysis, which is looking at missing network gaps in the system and to assess how we might eliminate those, what kind of facility types would be required, and what kind of design changes would need to be implemented through a resurfacing or reconstruction at that time. Then there are intensification corridors, and you'll see here Bayfield, S and Young as the 3 key ones to look at, as those corridors develop, what kind of infrastructure could be incorporated to make those more complete streets and better accommodate the future growth. These tend to be a little bit longer term, but the study is going to assess some options at this time and provide that information to city staff to help them in their future planning. And finally, cycling education and outreach, a really important component. This plan is not just about infrastructure, it's about developing an education and outreach strategy to promote the network that Barrie is implementing and to encourage people to use it. Next slide. So a few images about the network we're going to talk about. So it's, as I said earlier, it builds upon the recommendations in the Council Improved Transportation Master Plan. Most of the cycling infrastructure we're looking at currently is focused on arterial and collector roads and how we can provide designated facilities in most cases and connect to existing cycling infrastructure already on the ground in Barrie today. The Transportation Master Plan recommends a range of cycling infrastructure that follow best practices, and best practices being the new Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18, which was published by the Ministry of Transportation in 2021. And Barrie will be one of the first municipalities who's really ratcheting up and implementing infrastructure, applying that new guidance. The network will consist of signed routes, bicycle lanes, buffered bike lanes, cycle tracks, which are physically separated either on the road or above the curb, and in boulevard multi-use trails, which will be either adjacent to or in place of a sidewalk on one side of the road. Next slide. So my last slide before I pass it over to Justin. The network is being developed and is focusing on the design cyclist, which is the interested but concerned. So that, if you look at the bottom of the figure, those are lower stress environments, and it's meant to capture and develop a network that appeals to the broadest part of the population. So it's just not about putting bike lanes on major roadways that might appeal to 5 to 6% of the population. The city of Barrie is really serious about providing infrastructure that can accommodate people of all ages and abilities. And so the focus of this assignment is to investigate opportunities to do that now and to plan for the future. So I'm going to pass this over. Oh, one more slide. I lied. Next slide. Right, the next slide sort of gives you a quick little summary of the network in Barrie from the Transportation Master Plan. So just under 1,000 kilometers of existing infrastructure, including trails. And what's proposed in the TMP is just under 500 kilometers of new infrastructure that will be implemented over a 20-year period. And some of those facilities that are proposed will go through a planning and design exercise, and the facility type might need to be adjusted as they get to that stage. But we just wanted to give you a flavor of the scale of the network and really the how serious Barrie is in really implementing complete streets and accommodating active transportation. Now I will pass it over to my colleague, Justin Jones.
Thanks so much, Dave. Appreciate you providing that valuable context as we move forward with this project. So before we get started talking about the specifics of what we're looking at with the Cycle Barrie implementation program, what I wanted to show is the existing facilities that are already on the ground within the city of Barrie. So these maps show the different trails and bike lanes that exist within the city of Barrie in these in the brown lines. So you can see that there's already a strong foundation for us to build on. What I'm showing now is what has been designed in our phase 1 project. So these are what we would call kind of our quick wins. So these are a restriping condition that are a retrofit along existing corridors to add cycling facilities, primarily in the form of bike lanes, along a number of different corridors, over 20 kilometers of corridors that are going to create a much higher degree of connectivity around the city of Barrie. So let's get into what these look like. So the phase 1 projects are primarily focused around doing something that we call right-sizing roadways. This is also a term that you may have heard called a road diet, and we like to call it right-sizing the roadways. So that's more in line with analyzing how the road space is being used and ensuring that it's being used in the most efficient and effective way, given the goals of increasing mobility and modal choice. And by that, what I mean is giving people more choice in how they get around their community and how they're able to feel safe while doing it. So right sizing primarily focuses on taking either roads that have a little bit more width than the lanes would traditionally need, or taking roads that have more lanes than they might need given the number of automobiles that they're moving, and reallocating some of that space for cycling facilities. So what does that look like on the ground? Well, what we've got here is we've got a quick little schematic of a street that we've included in our first phase, and that's Johnson Street here in Barrie. So currently Johnson Street is one travel lane in each direction with on-street parking along the majority of the corridor. So this is what it would look like from kind of a nominal perspective. But once you see the number of vehicles that are typically parked on that corridor and the low parking utilization that exists there, what you end up with is a facility that looks like this, where you've got an effective 5.2 meter drive lane on either side, which does result in significantly higher speeds. And it also means less comfort for people riding their bikes because of the speed differential between the people driving and the people cycling. Our proposed for the future is to add buffered bike lanes on a street like Johnson, to narrow those drive lanes down to 3.3 meters, to add that cycling facility, and to ensure that there's that modal choice offered to more people. I do want to highlight that when it comes to adding these types of facilities and the type of thing that we're talking about with this right sizing approach, this is really a shift away from that automobility to expand options for people in how they get around their community. And it's done in a way that's quite efficient and effective. It's a cost-effective way that doesn't rely on costly retrofits or reconstruction, but it simply uses the existing space in that right-of-way, and it provides that additional transportation choice along that corridor. It's an approach that's consistent with a lot of municipalities across North America that are starting to reconsider what the role of their streets is, and imagining how those corridors can be used to increase mobility choice all over the community. And this also brings these existing built up areas within the city in line with the approach that's being taken within the secondary plan areas in the city, where parking is not being permitted along collector roads, and instead they are focusing on the role of those roads in serving mobility needs. So I'm going to go on here. I want to show just some of the, this is a detail of the engineering drawings that we're preparing for the city. So this is the level of detail that we're getting down to as we're preparing this project. So you'll see here that we're showing, the different signage that's required, the different striping on the roadway, and a lot of the different elements that are going to be incorporated as this new infrastructure rolls out. One of the pieces that I wanted to highlight as this moves forward is just the way that these different facilities are going to interact with transit along these corridors. So just one of the pieces that we're looking at here is the importance of adding some high contrast pavement markings to raise awareness of the need for mixing within that zone. So that's both for the bus operators as well as for the people cycling, to ensure that there's a higher awareness that those areas are going to be necessary as a mixing zone, so that the transit vehicle can effectively get over to the curb and unload passengers in accordance with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. It's very important that we have that type of understanding there. So as we move forward, we're looking at the, oh, sorry, I accidentally skipped a slide, went one too many. So what you can expect here in the next year is to see in 2022, the implementation on Little Avenue, on Johnson Street, on Bayview Drive from Little to Burton, and on Hanmer from Bayfield to St. Vincent. These are all council approved, and they are drawn up and they are ready to go. As we move forward in the coming years, you're going to start to see even more of these facilities start to come online. So subject to council approval in 23, you'll see Livingston Street, Grove Street, Mapleton Avenue, and Blake Street, as well as about 5 kilometers of additional signed routes as identified in the Transportation Master Plan. And then in 2024, you'll see implementation on Stanley Street, Madeline Drive, and Cox Mill Road, as well as about 5 more kilometers of signed route implementation, again, consistent with the approach in the Transportation Master Plan. So I'm going to just take a moment here and take a look at the Q&A just before we move on. So I just wanted to, before we move on to the gap analysis here, so we will respond to some of these questions. I think that there's some good, questions coming in. So we will pass those over, and we'll get some responses formulated and make sure that we're answering those in writing. So we will continue on just as we go through the gap analysis, and we should have lots of time for responding to questions at the end of the presentation. So let's keep on going here. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the gap analysis section. So this is kind of part B of our approach. So what we're looking at in part B is we're looking at a number of different gaps across the city of Barrie. So we're looking at these corridors here. I'm not going to read them out because it would take me a while, but I'm just going to let you take a look here. So, we're looking at gaps on Livingston Street, on Kendalls, on St. Vincent, Ashford, Blake, Big Bay Point, Minette's Point Road, and Tiffin Street. And we're going to go through each of these in some detail here as we go through this section of the presentation. So when you take a look and you see the phase 1 projects, as we talked about just previously, those the new striped facilities, this is what that looks like. And then when you overlay the gaps that we're examining, this is what you begin to see. So you really start to see the connectivity of these corridors start to increase even more as we start to fill in these gaps. So let's dive into each of these gaps on an individual level. So the first gap I want to talk to you about is the Livingston Street gap between Kozlov Street and Stanley Street. So this is a gap that will connect facilities to Ferndale, to Ann Street, a future north-south connection along Kozlov, a future north-south connection along Stanley, and the connection to downtown via the Duckworth Street facilities. So it's a fairly important gap in the city's network. The opportunities here are obviously some connections to commercial and employment areas, really establishes that east-west route and provides connectivity to existing cycling facilities, as I mentioned there on Ferndale and Kendalls. But this corridor is not without its challenges. Obviously, it's a limited right-of-way with narrow boulevards, power transmission lines. There's some grading, there's some retaining walls that need to be considered. So there are a number of different constraints when we're considering how we could implement cycling facilities, especially given that we do not want to, we want to try and put things above the curb as much as possible and provide physical separation on these busier roadways. So the next gap that I'd like to talk to you about is Kendalls Road West from Kozlov Street to Coulter Street. So this one provides some connectivity to the Hanmer Street facility, to the future signed route on Kozlov, to the future corridor, again on Kozlov, and then the future bike lanes on Coulter. So it does have a relatively high degree of connectivity, especially for such a short gap. So this gap provides some connectivity and allows for some multi-use path connections as well. So when we're looking at the potential options here, we're kind of looking at two options for this gap, one of which would be an in-boulevard multi-use path along Kendalls, and the other one would be potentially a trail through Riverwood Park. So when it comes to the multi-use path along Kendalls, the right-of-way boundary on the north side of the sidewalk may require some property acquisition. Would have to take a look at that, and it will definitely require an intersection crossing upgrade at Coulter to bring that up to AODA compliance. The challenges going through Riverwood Park would be that there would be some offsets that you'd want to maintain from the soccer fields, the potential of a future community garden, and it doesn't necessarily have quite the same degree of network connectivity. And I just want to highlight that we're giving you a lot of information in these slides, and these slides are all going to be posted in PDF on the project website, as will be the video from this presentation. So don't feel like you have to get all of the information out of this. We're going to make all of this available in public so that when you're providing us feedback and comments about these things, you'll be able to access all the files that we've posted, and you'll have a clear understanding of what it is that we're asking you to comment on. The next gap would be St. Vincent Street from Bell Farm Road to Ottaway Avenue. So this is one that provides some connectivity to Duckworth and Georgian Drive, to new bike lanes on Bell Farm Road, which are coming online in 2022, connects to the signed route on Ottaway, and it provides that connectivity to downtown using those low stress local streets. The constraints here are that there's some grading and drainage challenges, and it might require a modification of that Bell Farm Road intersection just to ensure that people are able to transition safely from that facility onto the future facility that we may recommend here. So looking at Ashford Drive, so that would be the gap here. And so that gap we're looking at in terms of its connectivity to the cycling facility on Hearst through the connection to Cox Mill Road and that signed facility and the bike lane there. We're looking at the existing cycling facility on Dean Avenue and the proposed facility on Madeline that would provide that connectivity all the way down to Mapleview. This connection also provides some access to a couple of schools and a community park. So it does have the potential to serve quite a bit of need in this area. Of course, the challenges are that we're looking at a narrow boulevard, the loss of some parking potentially in that in the parking lot along the street, and potentially some utility conflicts and property constraints. So we definitely want to be mindful of that as we're moving forward with this recommendation. The next one I'd like to talk to you about is Blake Street. So this is from Puget to Steele Street, and this provides some great connectivity to a number of different facilities, including the Johnson Street bike lanes. So this one provides that connection and a lot of connectivity to the commercial plaza, as well as a whole lot of multi-unit residential buildings. So it's a relatively high density of both population and destinations along this corridor. So we see it as a relatively important one to move forward. The challenges here, one of the challenges that could also prove to be an opportunity is that the asphalt in the surface is at the end of its life cycle. So there's a number of sidewalk gaps and drainage issues. The fact that it's a rural cross section, it doesn't have curbs or sidewalks or, kind of proper drainage. So it may be more appropriate for this facility to look at a complete reconstruction rather than just an interim measure like paving shoulders. So, instead of doing paved shoulders on this corridor, maybe it ends up coming up for a reconstruction and, potentially cycle tracks or the type of separated cycling facilities that the city is looking to move towards with its reconstruction projects rather than the retrofits like we're talking about with the other projects. So the next corridor I'd like to just speak really quickly about is Big Bay Point Road from Prince William Way to Hearst. So this is a gap that would connect you kind of east-west across Big Bay Point Road. So the opportunities here would provide some connectivity between those facilities on Hearst and Prince William, as well as the proposed facilities on Sandringham. And it would connect the city's southeast neighborhoods to the waterfront. The challenges here are, there's some grading issues on both sides. It definitely, given the speed and volume and width of this corridor, there's the potential conflict without the kind of retrofit conditions. It may be a challenge to implement something that would meet the needs. And this one may really warrant a broader corridor study, especially something that would take into account the need to extend this corridor a little bit further to the east. So I think this is not my last one, second last one here for the gaps. So the next one that we want to talk about is the Yonge Street and Minette's Point Road, the connection between the Whiskey Creek Trail and Lakeshore Drive. So this one's obviously one of the important ones, given that it's a major north-south route, connects to the Trans-Canada Trail and the waterfront in Barrie. And so we recognize the importance of that corridor. It connects to Little Avenue, which is being implemented in 2022, and it connects all the way down to Mapleview Drive. So we see it as a pretty important gap. But with that said, as many of those opportunities are there, there's also a fair number of challenges with this corridor. So there's a number of different property constraints that may require property acquisition or examining that type of investment. And there's quite a few utility conflicts too. So whether it's hydro poles, fire hydrants, those types of things, as well as a rail crossing. And anytime you're going over a rail line, there is always going to be a higher degree of scrutiny over that project. And then finally, the last corridor, the last gap that I wanted to highlight to you today is the Tiffin Street gap between Essa Road and Lakeshore Drive. So this is one that provides connection down to the waterfront. And it would be an important connection to have a little bit more of an all ages and abilities design focus. With that said, though, if you're familiar with this area, you know that there's limited right-of-way space and it's a very complex intersection. There's a lot of movements, a lot of challenges in terms of close intersection spacing. And the fact that this area was reconstructed not too long ago, so it's in very good condition. So there's a reticence to do any of the kind of like big tear up work with that existing facility. The considerations here could be that there might be an alternative route, maybe using Innisfil or Victoria, but then there's also an environmental assessment ongoing on this that incorporates the Bradford Street area. So that environmental assessment is also something that we're looking at as it continues on, but that would be a long range planning study and not something that you would see the results of for several years. So the one thing I want to highlight as we go through this is that the outputs from this gap analysis is going to be an evaluation of what we feel should be considered as we go forward with this, and we'll develop conceptual designs for those gaps to give the city a rough idea of how they can plan their future capital projects. So what that means in terms of the implementation is that city staff would use the information that we provide to the city to inform a future capital project. So it may be a retrofit, in which case it's a little easier, or it may be more of like a reconstruction, and it would be like a broader capital project that's required to install the types of facilities that we'd be looking at. In some locations, there may be a municipal class environmental assessment that's triggered, and that adds time and delay to the project as well. And then finally, just to highlight again, going back to that municipal class environmental assessment, if that's required, it does add project phases. It adds additional study that's required, additional notification requirements, those kinds of things. So as we go through this, one of the pieces that we were going to be looking for your feedback on the project webpage is helping us to identify which of these gaps you would see as kind of the top priority or priorities, because understanding that there is limited resources and the city wants to prioritize the investments that are going to have the biggest bang for their buck, we want to look at the gaps in terms of where they're going to provide the highest degree of connectivity and safety for the residents of Barrie. So I'm seeing quite a few questions come in, which is great. We are going to get to those questions as we get to the end. We have a couple more sections here, and I don't think it'll take too long. So we'll have lots of time for questions and answers at the end of it. So I hope everyone is okay if we just kind of keep going here. I get no feedback on the webinar. That's the one challenge. So I do want to move on into the intensification corridors section of our discussion. And I want to just provide everyone a little bit of context about the intensification corridor project that we're looking at. So when it comes to the intensification corridors, what we're doing is we're looking at the primary intensification corridors within the city that are experiencing the highest growth in terms of new population and destinations. So these are the types of places that are starting to turn over and have the traditional kind of low-rise land use be replaced by mixed use and mid-rise development. So they're starting to densify and urbanize in a more meaningful way. And so there is a significant opportunity to improve access to transit, to active transportation, and to create more of kind of like an urban environment along those corridors. So the goal here for this part of the assignment is for us to come up with a ranking and a prioritization for the corridors that we've talked about, which is Bayfield from Hanmer to Simcoe, Yonge Street from Essa to Mapleview, and Essa from Tiffin to Mapleview. So the objective here is really for us to provide at a high level what the city could potentially do on one of these corridors and evaluate whether or not it would be suitable for a retrofit condition or whether any of these corridors would require more of a complete reconstruction in order to accommodate the types of cycling facilities that would be suitable for a corridor of this kind of volume and speed. So we'll be looking at each of the corridors to identify whether or not a retrofit or a comprehensive corridor reconstruction project would be more applicable to accommodate all modes. We'll be evaluating the barriers to implementation, including property, utilities, and grading, looking at the implementation costs at a high level, looking at land use and redevelopment trends, and then identifying potential demand along those corridors. The intensification corridors, just to contextualize what we're looking at, you can see them on the map here, and you can see that there are, the three of them and the way that they connect into the existing and the design facilities. So they do provide some good connectivity into the city's downtown, and we're just trying to evaluate which one of those might be most applicable for a retrofit, acknowledging that even with a retrofit, we're probably looking at fairly significant capital costs for these, and it would definitely take some time and some effort for the city to move these types of major projects forward. So just about done, promise. Let's stop talking at you. But I wanted to highlight our education and encouragement program. So one of the pieces that we're doing, in addition to looking at a plan for the physical infrastructure in the city of Barrie, is looking at a plan that's also going to support the development of a stronger set of social infrastructure to support cycling within the city of Barrie. The way that we're going to be doing that is by developing an outreach and education program that the city would be able to essentially kind of look at and say, yes, we think that we can do this. So we're going to be looking at a jurisdictional scan of comparative municipalities. So we're looking at 10 different municipalities all across Ontario, conducting an extensive best practices scan and determining what common elements are there to support active transportation and cycling within those communities, and which ones would be most applicable for a community like Barrie. Once we're done that, we'll then turn that over to the city, and it'll be up to the city to determine whether or not they want to bring that in-house and increase, potentially look at a staffing partnership or bring a new staff on to help support that, or outsource it and retain some specialists and build capacity within the community, potentially in like the nonprofit or in other service delivery agencies to help improve the education and encouragement programs within the city of Barrie. So I'm almost done. We are at the next step. So we just want to talk a little bit about the project timelines and the next steps for this project and what's coming up. So the first thing that you need to know is that as 2022 moves on, we're going to be completing the design concepts for the network gaps, as well as the design concept for the intensification corridor that's identified within that phase of the project. We'll also be looking at the program specifications for the education and outreach programs and the way that we can support the city in rolling those out. And then, of course, that's not the only thing that the city is doing to support cycling. In general, most of the collector and arterial roads in the city have been identified for the inclusion of cycling infrastructure. And so as there's new reconstruction and capital works that are occurring along those corridors as identified in the transportation master plan, those are going to be the place where that kind of high quality cycling facilities are going to be installed, particularly looking at things that are separated from the travel lanes by physical barriers. And then I wanted to just, I'm going to just show everyone what the project website looks like and just give you kind of a quick tour of the different tools that are available to you there, and highlight the way that we'd like you to make your voices heard as this project moves forward. So you can go to buildingbarrie.ca/cyclebarrie and find the project website. I'm going to stop my share on the on my PowerPoint here, and I'm going to show you guys. Give me 1 second. I've lost it now. There it is. So this is the Cycle Barrie project page on the Building Barrie website. And when you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see two tools there that are available to, well, there's a number of different tools. So there is the questions tool, the mapping tool, the ideas tool, and then the survey. So the survey will give you an opportunity to take a look at a number of different elements. So asking for what your priorities are in terms of the gaps, asking you to identify any other gaps that you identify. And then the mapping tool is a place where you can put specific pins on places. So you can see we've already populated one here for you. So this is going to be, just a highlight there that there's cycling lanes on this segment. So that was Brett put that one on, which is great. So you can see that there's the opportunity. All you need to do here is click on the plus button here, the add pin, take a marker, and you can just drag it on over to wherever you want, put it down, and let us know what you want to say. So you can just say Go Station is here. And then that will show up. Once you click submit, that will show up on the map. So that's the way that we would like to gather your feedback as this project goes forward. So I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint, and then we will close this off, and we'll have an opportunity for question and answer. So just to highlight that if you have any questions about the project, after this session, we encourage you to contact Brett at the City of Barrie at brett.graytrix@barrie.ca. And also you can contact Dave at dave.mclaughlin@wsp.com. So either of those emails will get you to the right person, and we'll be able to field your questions in that forum as well. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. We're going to get into the question and answer portion of our session. Okay, so what we're going to look at here is, I think we'll kind of start. Well, we'll start from the top. Why not? So one of the questions here is the populations of seniors is increasing. Where do scooters fit in this plan, as many are using these tools, as well as people with disabilities? So Dave, you want to field that one?
Sure, love to. We got some great questions, actually. I've been looking at them in advance, so we're going to try our best between Brett and I and Justin to answer your questions as we go through. So, it's a great question, actually, as we design this infrastructure. Mobility scooters or power assisted scooters that seniors are using, or people with disabilities, technically fall under the pedestrian category and are expected to use sidewalks. But we know, and most cities know, that many of them like to be in the bike lane on the asphalt for a lot of different reasons. So, in terms of easy, and that's okay, depending on the system, but they are encouraged to be using sidewalks and in boulevard multi-use trails. Now, e-scooters is a whole different animal, and different municipalities are wrestling with how to use e-scooters in their municipality. Some are not permitting them, at the City of Toronto currently. Others are permitting them only on in their bike lanes, which is a little bit more common for municipalities who do permit them. There are a few municipalities in Canada, including Calgary, in their wisdom, is currently allowing them on sidewalks, but most municipalities don't allow them on sidewalks because of the challenge with speed and conflicting with, people of all ages, dog walkers, pedestrians. So that's not as common. I don't know, Brett, if you want to comment on the e-scooter issue.
Yeah, e-scooters, just for everyone's clarity, that's the stand-up kick style scooters, not necessarily the sit-down mobility scooters. So definitely two different types. Yeah, we're taking a wait and see approach because there's a number of risks, concerns from the accessibility community, and liability issues as well. So we're really waiting to see who takes us on and where the province goes with this pilot. If they intend to roll this out as a provincial policy, then that makes things much more straightforward for implementation. But there are a number of barriers to undertaking the pilot, and actually quite a bit of cost the city would need to incur. So we're really interested in taking a bit of a position from the bleachers just to see how this works out for folks. And just on the mobility scooter aspect, we have a sidewalk infill program to build upon our sidewalk network to make sure we have really good connectivity. We're also actively installing sidewalk curb drops if they're missing. And if there's any locations that are a problem for anybody, we encourage you to reach out to Service Barrie to let them know, and they can program that and action that as best they can. It might not be today or tomorrow, but it's really important that that gets to them so they can put that in their work program and action it, because a lot of times they might not know where some of those issues are. So the more we hear back from residents, the better we can serve.
Awesome.
Okay. All right, let's get through some of these questions. There's some really good ones. So the next question is, how safe are road diets and painted bike lanes for cyclists?
So I'll take that one maybe. Road diets is something that is increasingly being considered by municipalities. For those of you who may not know, the way we design roads with wide travel lanes is sort of the past. There are new design guidance in Canada that encourages municipalities to narrow travel lanes for motor vehicle lanes, so that encourages cars to actually travel in line with what the posted speed limit is, which is really important. But it also allows more space on roadways to make use of for other purposes. And there are roads where you may have a 4-lane road, but the reality is, given the traffic operations, having a 3-lane cross section with a 2-way center left turn lane can be just effective in terms of accommodating capacity, but it also provides you space to put in bike facilities or widen your boulevards. So road diets are a really fabulous tool. The province has recognized them and has actually indicated that road diets no longer require a class environmental assessment, which was a lengthy study that was used to have to do a road diet. Now all I have to do is just complete a traffic analysis. Now, painted bike lanes, it's a really good comment. In the new design guidance for OT and Book 18, painted bike lanes are generally now referred to only roads that have 3 lanes or less, not multi-lane roads. So in the future, you won't really see conventional bike lanes on a 4 or 5-lane road. They'll typically be on collectors with 3 or 2 lanes on them, usually posted at 50, sometimes 60, and usually having good sight lines. But we do know that with painted bike lanes, they only appeal to a certain part of the population. So there is a significant focus where possible to implement separated facilities or buffered bike lanes. Sometimes the buffer will have flex bollards or precast curbs in it to provide separation. Many municipalities sort of start off with the buffered bike lanes, and over time, as demand warrants, they'll increase, provide more separation, and they've already got the buffer width, so they can do that. So we're finding that that's a much more effective approach. And in terms of safety, nothing is ever safe, but these guidelines that are out that are being applied to Barrie are the best that we have in Canada at this time, and are really focused on improving safety for all road users. And I think bike lanes have their place in a network. It's just making sure it's on the right road. Over to you, Justin. Next question.
Yeah, I just wanted to also highlight the importance of looking at a cycling facility in terms of narrowing. We kind of talked about it in the context of Johnson, and the idea that by adding those kind of visual elements, you do narrow the effective right of way and increase the compliance and reduce the speed of the vehicles traveling along that corridor as well. So the next question is, how are these bike lanes impacted seasonally, such as snow removal?
So maybe I'll take that too, and Brett, you're welcome to step in. So, one of the approaches that Barrie's doing, which I would argue many municipalities are doing, is they ramp up implementing their bike networks, especially with buffered bike lanes, is that they are using their current snowplow equipment to maintain that infrastructure. But over time, as more use occurs in those bike facilities, they need to rethink how they will be maintaining that infrastructure during winter months. Because you probably will be putting in flex bollards or precast curbs to provide more separation, because there'll be an increasing demand to do that over time. So it's an iterative approach, and I think Barrie will be starting off that way. There will be some dedicated infrastructure for sure, and you'll see that in the coming years, and some actually very soon. But that's one approach for winter maintenance. And I think, yes, you get a lot of snow in Barrie. Lots of cities get lots of snow. There are ways to manage that. When we design these infrastructure, we also have to accommodate setbacks behind the curb to accommodate some snow storage. Some municipalities like Sudbury, for example, is implementing a bunch of separated infrastructure and cycle tracks, but they're not committing to winter maintaining them at this time because they just don't have the budget or ability to remove that snow. So they're actually storing their snow in their cycling infrastructure, and their cycling community at this time, is agreeable to that because they get this awesome cycling network during most of the season. But during the winter, most of their network, except for some key spines, is not winter maintained. But more and more municipalities in Southern Ontario are taking a different approach and are trying to winter maintain as much of the network over time as they can, as more and more people cycle year round. So I don't know, Brett, if you want add to anything else on the winter maintenance side?
Yeah, that's kind of a fireside chat here. The on-road cycling infrastructure is actually sometimes the easiest to maintain because we can leverage the existing equipment. What we're finding is what we're preparing for and planning for as we transition to more separated facilities through these reconstruction projects, moving to cycle tracks on our busier arterial roads, is we're starting to try and figure out how we're actually going to winter maintain these that infrastructure. So we've been working with WSP on some options on the configuration, and we're looking at potentially a configuration where the sidewalk and the cycle track are side by side, and that might allow us to leverage a single pass depending on the stone removal specific equipment for that corridor. So it's definitely a challenge, and we're learning with other municipalities. It's a bit more of a challenge for snowbelt communities that are in the north versus our friends in the south, but it's something that we can leverage experience in the States too, because they're a little bit ahead of the curve when it comes to cycling infrastructure in some instances. So it's something we're actively looking at for sure.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we can highlight here too is just, especially along the corridors that we're speaking of in phase A, it effectively is no change in operations. Those corridors are already being cleared of snow to the curb, and that would be the exact same condition that we would be looking at with the cycling facility. Great. So I'm realizing that we probably won't get through all of the questions. I am seeing quite a few of them, but just rest assured that any of the questions that we don't get to this evening, we will definitely be responding to those through the project website. So you can keep an eye out there, and we'll make sure to post the responses in a frequently asked questions section, especially if there's more than one of the same kind of question. So I think there's a question here that's a few questions in one, and I think there are probably some relatively kind of rapid fire answers here. But is there a remediation plan for surfaces in disrepair with respect to the needs of people on bikes versus other vehicles? I think that's just kind of the city's general maintenance state of good repair.
Yeah, I can hit this one quickly. So we try and hit things equally, but as we put cycling lanes on corridors, that'll definitely push, I believe, the prioritization higher on some of these corridors. Grove Street is one when we go to retrofit that there'll be definitely some conversations on the condition of that asset and if we can align some renewal activities with that. So definitely a great question on that. Cleaning of roads that have historically attracted debris. Please contact Service Barrie if you see any corridors that have sand or they're just have been missed or there's issues with. Our operations team can respond quickly once they have that information, but it's really best, it's really helpful when you and folks in the community submit those requests, then that can be actioned into a work plan. So that's the best way to get that dealt with. And on the last one, Celebrate Cycling Bike to School Days. Yeah, we're ramping up that. We're looking at seeing if we can onboard a staff member to support with that, where it's still early days incubation, thinking about those types of things, but that's definitely where we'd like to go in the future. I could
and
hit
that,
some of these in rapid fire.
yeah, absolutely. Well, let's
Yeah.
and you know, I just want to highlight that type of thing, like in terms of the bike to school days and those types of elements, those are going to be the kinds of things that are going to show up in the education and outreach program that's going to be recommended. So I think that's definitely a great suggestion.
Greg's question here regarding the short little sections of cycling infrastructure. That was kind of the purpose of this program, is trying to make those connections as best we can to make kind of a base network that we can build from. And just maybe if we weren't as, I just want to hit on this point again with folks, that the long-term goal where appropriate is to move from an on-road painted facility to a higher order facility where it's appropriate and can be justified as part of future reconstruction projects. So if we see a road with on-road cycling infrastructure we're proposing that may be in the gray area or might in the future fall within the guidelines to move to a higher order facility, when we're looking to do a full reconstruction, we'll absolutely be looking to make sure or examine options to see if we can achieve the best facility within the constraints of that corridor when that time comes. So that's an important point as well.
Brett, you want to take Hammer one as well?
Yeah, Hammer St. Vincent. Yeah, great question. That's a challenging one because there's almost enough space on the crossing itself to sneak in a narrow bike lane, which is it's not ideal on a facility such as that. But the real challenge is the connectivity on either end. So what we recommend is for you to get in touch and get involved with us during our transportation master plan, which will be starting officially the first quarter of next year. And we'll be looking to develop kind of a 10-year prioritization plan for some of these broader capital projects. And we'll be looking at just analyzing demand, but also feedback from the community and trying to establish just an evidence-based approach to where we can allocate our dollars most effectively to further build out the network.
Right. I mean, crossings of Highway 400 are really integral to the success of moving people on foot and transit and by bike. And Barrie and Transportation Master Plan from 2019 really focuses in on that. And actually, the next question that's being asked really speaks to that, right? Which is the whole concept of transition from vehicular traffic to transit and walking and cycling. And again, the TMP that you'll see on the Barrie website provides a lot of details and a strategy for the city to start moving that direction, to realize that they need to, and it's not like they haven't been, but they need to do more in terms of developing a multimodal transportation system as the city matures and grows over time. And part of that focus is to get people out on foot and by bike, especially for shorter distance trips, which is one of the reasons why you're seeing this network develop the way it is. A lot of thought was put into density, access to the network, who would benefit most from implementing certain networks. Thinking about equity across the network is a really important consideration. There are those who can't afford a car and rely on other modes of transportation. We want to make sure the network is designed and prioritized in a way that they benefit especially, and to help them out move through and navigate through the community. Vision Zero is also a question that was asked, an excellent question. Remember, I talked earlier about this goal of sort of narrowing travel lanes. It's all about making sure that motor vehicle traffic is traveling at the desired speed and the posted speed. And the cycling infrastructure is designed in such a way that it works well with traffic. And if it's on a faster moving road, that it typically is above the curb or separated in some form. So that applies that Vision Zero lens to everything we're doing, which is all about dealing with the differential in speed between people on bikes and walking and motor vehicles. And the whole TMP is predicated on that. And I think the next TMP will even dig into that a little bit deeper. So Chris asked about, do you have pictures or diagrams of separated facilities? Excellent question. The TMP does that. I'm going to take 1 minute, if it's okay, and share my screen, Mr. Jones. And I will just show everyone. So this is from the Transportation Master Plan. Can you see that?
Yeah, it's a little, you may need to zoom in just a smidge, Dave.
So
there we go.
TMP, it provides sort of a summary of different types of facility types. That includes off-road trails, in boulevard multi-use trails, cycle tracks, whether it be adjacent to curb. More often it's set back from the back of the curb by about 1/2 meter or more. And that's where you'll see snow being stored in the winter. Buffered bike lanes, as an example here. Conventional bike lanes as well. Traditional signed bike routes, which is so a low speed, low volume sort of residential street with sidewalks, but really no need for a designated bike facility. And then sidewalks, of course, are integral components. So the whole network is sort of based on these different types of facility types, and they will look a little bit different depending on the context and the location in Barrie. But there's a lot of focus to trying to provide that separation. And with the buffer that you see in the middle of the screen, there, once you have the buffer, as demand increases and as the municipality has more resources to do winter maintenance, there'll be an opportunity to put in delineators, whether they be flexible bollards or even precast curbs, to actually provide increased separation on those facilities over time. And for some of these roads, including what you see in the picture, when those roads come up at the end of their life for reconstruction or rehabilitation, and they're replacing curbs and updating the asphalt, there's an opportunity to actually push the curbs in if they wanted to, and raise the facility type so it's in the boulevard and actually physically separated from motor vehicle traffic. It doesn't really impact the flow of motor vehicle traffic. It's just repurposing the space in the roadway in a way that provides that increased sense of safety. And you heard Brett earlier in the presentation talk about the fact that some of these installations will begin with bike lanes and buffered bike lanes, but as those roads get reconstructed in the longer term, there'll be opportunities to enhance those facilities, provide that separation, and even put those facilities into the boulevard or the roadways and right out of the sort of stream of motor vehicle traffic. All right. So I will stop sharing and back to questions to you, Justin.
Great. So there's a couple that I'm just kind of firing off responses to. So there's a question about the education and outreach and just if we could involve the active transportation committee, and to that I say, like, absolutely, we will. Right now what we're doing is just kind of doing our best practice research, and we'll be circling back to key stakeholders within the city, including the committee in the future. So that's definitely part of our assignment. We have a great question here from the county that's asking about the Simcoe County Loop Trail. So have we considered regional cycling routes that travel north, south, or east, west, and how that might be integrated into the cycling infrastructure in the city of Barrie?
Yeah, so for sure, that's part of the grand plan. In fact, the grand plan is to have an off-road trail system from Aurelia through Barrie all the way down to Lake Ontario, and parts of it have already been implemented. And
up to me in Collingwood too, right. if I hear things properly. So
right. Yeah, the trail connection to Aurelia, that's pretty well connected. We're actually undertaking a waterfront trail master plan, a waterfront park master plan update. And that was one of the comments I provided to see if we could speak with the township or Modante to see if there's opportunities, just as a friendly suggestion, to improve their connectivity to our rail trail that runs to our waterfront. And that actually loops around the bay, and then that actually connects to the gap that we've identified in Minets, and that will connect into the Trans-Canada Trail that runs up basically parallel to Huronia Road, and then on Huronia Road as it exits south of the city. Also east-west, we have the connection on Tiffin Street, which ties into the Trans-Canada Trail, which has been subject to a road right-sizing, and the underpass under Highway 400 has been constructed to accommodate cycling lanes. So that improvement's been made as well. But there's always that challenge. I know the county's thinking about the connection out to Collingwood. There's a little bit of a gap there. So that one's a tough one with Highway 90. There's not really a great connection, but potentially we do have the Barrie Collingwood Railway corridor. If anything did change with the operation of that short line rail, we definitely look to preserve that corridor to make that connection in the future, but definitely a great question.
Someone else asked about flexible delinear posts.
Yeah. I was going to hit that one quickly. Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, that one example you're pointing out to, that was the Duckworth interchange, and that's something that we might make a recommendation to council for consideration of us piloting at that location. That was a design, and it's interesting, and Dave can speak to it because he was involved with establishing the provincial guidelines, but just how far we've came in even 10 years. So when that interchange was being constructed, kind of the design elements would have happened even 10 years before that. So in the very early 2000s. So it's just things have changed so much. So that's a corridor where if we were starting that now from scratch, the buffered bike lane wouldn't be the solution we go with, but a delineator post might be a good interim solution that provides a higher level of safety for riders.
Right. Another question about two-stage left turn queue boxes and bicycle signals and similar solutions elsewhere. So absolutely, as this network matures over time, there will be some of those techniques that will be implemented in Barrie. The focus right now in this initial study are those quick wins and to start to eliminate those gaps in the network. There are some complex intersections and locations that will take more effort and time, and likely will be associated with reconstruction and rehab of certain roadways. You'll be seeing those types of techniques implemented in the network over time in the future. Another question about cycling infrastructure, and maybe Justin, you want to take this one? It's really about encouraging people to cycle and achieving those increases, commuting to work, commuting to school, recreational and fitness.
Yeah, I think you know what this is really to me what this question asks about, and you know, I asked what are the primary goals for enhancing the cycling infrastructure with respect to expected increases in usage, you know, commuting to work, to school, recreational, fitness. You know, I think that the overall goal in a lot of this is really just to improve modal choice within the city, particularly as the city continues to grow. You know, communities that are growing the pace that Barrie grows pretty quickly run into just a simple geometry problem. And the geometry is this: as you start to fit more people into that same existing built environment, and you start to see your downtown get more and more popular and the destinations get more and more popular, you just run out of room for cars. And you need to start thinking about how you can use your roadways more effectively and more efficiently, so that you're able to continue to grow and bring in new population and make it affordable and accessible for people to live, work, and play within the community. So, you know, while there's not necessarily specific modal share goals identified within the Cycle Barrie infrastructure program, the goal is really to enhance transportation choice within the city. And I think that the discussion about, in particular, about, you know, looking at different modal choice and modal share goals would be a conversation that's better suited for the transportation master plan in the future. And certainly as you're looking at some of these intensification corridors.
Well, actually,
yeah, and just if like on that the series of questions, I'd check all of the above on those comments. As we grow from a population of roughly 147,000 to a planned population of just under 300,000 for 2051, we really need to pick up the active transportation and transit mode share, because we will still need to continue widening roads within limits on strategic corridors, but really we're moving towards kind of a build out scenario very quickly. In all sense, basically, I'm anticipating that we're not going to see much more windings potentially from what's identified for 41, and that's it. That would be kind of the network for here on out. So we really need to encourage that to divert trips away from auto usage as much as we can, but also being pragmatic too. We recognize the seasonality here in the city, but that's where transit comes in as well. So we really want a balanced approach, but we really need to start shifting, encouraging folks to start thinking about other choices other than just the car.
Right. Another person has asked about the Tiffin Essa Bradford intersection and whether, you know, it's being considered for a roundabout. So Brett can answer that question, but first, just so you know, the new design guidelines for Ontario absolutely include solutions on how to accommodate bike facilities and bike networks through roundabouts in Ontario, and any intersection that would be implemented with a roundabout, there is a design solution to accommodate bikes. Brett, do you want to comment on that one location?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Jim. The pedestrian and cyclist integration with that solution will definitely be very carefully evaluated. And then we would see how we could potentially integrate proper crossings to facilitate those users. What we're looking at now, as we've seen in the EA, I believe in the ultimate configuration, we're both a 3-lane roundabouts, at least 3 lane at the Bradford Tiffin and potentially 2 at Lakeshore Tiffin. So those do become a little bit more challenging, not impossible, but definitely more challenging. So that's definitely a factor that will be heavily looked at because that location is not really a suburban location. That's more of a pedestrian and cyclist focused location. So we need to be very careful about accommodating all users equally and then balancing competing needs. So definitely something that we're considering.
All right, Justin, you want to ask one of the other questions?
Yeah, I'll just quickly respond to this one about the idea of like kind of an app to encourage biking in Barrie, Ontario. I'm just going to reference that that's something that we can look into in the education piece. We'll definitely take a look at that Go by Bike BC app and take a peek. Next one, the next question would be, we've already kind of answered that one in terms of has any thought been put into improving connections to Barrie, into Barrie, i.e. improvements to Trans-Canada Trail coming into Barrie from the south. So that would be out of scope of this project, but I'm sure it's something that's
it's identified in the transportation master plan, actually. It's
yeah,
a key component. So yeah.
Okay. All right, let's take a quick look.
So Brett, the one question about.
Oh, sorry, my internet was just cutting out there. So is this about the app?
No, we're past that. The one question about Ferndale and Ardagh.
Oh, Ferndale and Tiffin, yeah, great. Yeah, that was actually pulling up the map, which kind of killed my net there. Yeah, great question. I used to cycle on that corridor when I lived in that part of town to work. Yeah, no, for sure. Until we get and that's a corridor where Ferndale itself, that's more of a larger capital project. Tiffin, we did do a road diet with bicycling lanes, and they typically get touched up every year as part of our line painting program, but they do wear down. What I did when I took that route was try to utilize as many local streets as I could to make that connection. And then once I made the crossing under Highway 400, try and hit Innisfil Street to take some of the local streets to connect to the waterfront. I don't necessarily know where you're going, but that's always been my strategy on some of those busier routes is even if they did have facilities, I prefer the lower stress environments wherever I can to cycle. So that might be an option, but feel free to reach out if you have any other questions.
Right. Someone asked a really good question. There seems to be a movement towards, reducing bike lanes on road and going to separate infrastructure. And that's partly true. Cyclists are vehicles under the law and they're permitted to ride on roads, except, highways, 400 series highways, or any roads that are designated not for cycling. But we are trying to improve infrastructure for all ages and abilities. And we know, and we've known this over the last 10 to 15 years, if not longer, that conventional bike lanes on roads will only, encourage 5 to 7% of the population are comfortable in that space from using them on higher speed roads. On lower speed roads and low volume roads, they're fine. And that's why Barrie's implementing those and applying the guidance in OT Book 18. But it is true that there is a movement to provide more dedicated cycling infrastructure, especially in higher volume, higher speed, collector and arterial type roads. And you'll see municipalities across the country continuing down that path.
And I should also highlight, one of the things here that was raised is the idea that it brings up property issues. And for the most part, that is usually not the case. Usually you can accommodate a separated cycling facility or cycle track in a traditional 20-meter right of way without any property acquisition. It's when you start to get into some of these existing facilities where there's a reticence to remove lanes or the lane widths are already quite narrow and your right of way is already kind of pretty tight against some of the property. But for the most part, accommodating separated cycle tracks within the existing right of way that the city owned property is usually relatively straightforward.
Right. There's a good question here that actually we talked about before the open house, Brett and I, about, someone's asking why are bike lanes being included as part of every new road being built moving forward? Well, actually, I think, Brett, you can say that the majority of collector and arterial roads, as they, get to the end of life and they're being resurfaced and rehabilitated, every one of those is being considered for some kind of cycling infrastructure in that sort of classification of roadway in Barrie, I think. Brett, do you want to?
Everything that's being reconstructed for absolutely. So that gives us that opportunity to test what we're looking at against the current Book 18. And in some cases, that allows us to take an EA, environmental assessment, and undertake a corridor study. We always try and do that. That's the most opportune time to implement that type of cycling infrastructure. When we're doing our resurfacing program, there's always consultation internally. And if a road aligns with what we're doing, that's where we try our best to make sure that happens. But even if it didn't necessarily happen, again, road resurfacing, we're typically just working between the curbs. So if something could have happened prior to the resurfacing, it can happen after. We always try our best to align that timing, but it doesn't preclude something from happening. So an example of a project that we're moving forward with is cycling lanes on Hanmer Street. That's going to be resurfaced this year. So we've coordinated that project together. So that's how we're moving forward with that.
Someone also asked about, bike parking and the importance of that. And the Transportation Master Plan actually does provide recommendations for Barrie to ramp up bike parking in municipal road right-of-ways and to work with the private sector to enhance and improve more bike parking at key locations, especially institutional locations like the library and other facilities like that. So that is captured in the Transportation Master Plan. It's just not part of this particular assignment. Maybe Brett, you could take the question about, the whole length of St. Vincent. Why isn't it be considered as a quick build?
Yeah, that's St. Vincent's a challenging one with just the property constraints. So that'd be subject to a broader corridor study. And really that's where we have to get into kind of an evidence-based prioritization of those corridors, because those studies are costly, time consuming, and we need to just make sure we're hitting one correctly. So that one is one of the reasons that it's not being undertaken at this time, but we definitely want that feedback as part of the TMP update to understand where folks are cycling and where they'd like to see those improvements for sure. Looking at some of the previous questions, did we note that S is being reconstructed with a multi-use path? So cycling infrastructure is being planned there. MTO is replacing that corridor starting this year, that interchange. And that's a multi-use path extending from Bryn to Fairview Drive. So that's a project that's underway.
Awesome. Someone else has asked about sensors, detector loops, and technology to pick up bikes at intersections going forward. Brett, do you want to comment on Barrie?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brent. Traffic Services is actually looking into that. They've had some other inquiries regarding that. So if you want to send an email, I can follow up with you on that, but that's an active element that they're looking into.
Okay, we've talked about maintenance, I think, already several times. Someone's commented about, challenges getting to West Bayfield Public School and the importance of infrastructure for that. And that's a really good point. You should know that the network that was developed for the TMP and that this study is about implementing paid a lot of focus on schools and connecting schools as best as possible. So if you overlay the network of schools in Barrie, you'll see that the majority of the AT network actually touches them all. And it's just going to take some time to implement those facilities going forward. So Justin, there's a comment here about would the city of Barrie consider a public engagement program. You want to touch on that one, maybe with Brett?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I'm just trying to find it here.
I think the comment is, would City of Barrie consider a public engagement program?
Got it. Yeah.
Internal staff or community organizations, and I think that is happening for the transportation master plans and major infrastructure projects. The city actually tries very hard to engage, both in-house staff, but community organizations and stakeholder groups, as well as members of the public and agencies that are influenced or impacted, as well as the private sector, because they all have a right and to comment and very often are part of the solution. And engagement and consultation is incredibly important. That's why we're here today with you, and why we have the survey, and we're allowing you to ask all the questions you want, and you'll have weeks, if not probably, I would say 3 to 4, probably 4 weeks to mark up on the site any suggestions on that map and to complete your survey. There'll be lots of time for you to provide your input over this course of the assignment. It's an iterative process that's going to happen over the next couple of years. And you may have some ideas that come up that you didn't hear from us today, but you think is a good idea. We want to hear. Brett wants to hear about those ideas, and this is your opportunity to jot them down. And if the survey period is over in a month, that's okay. You still have Brett's contact information. Send him all the emails you want.
And the other piece too, and I'll just quickly highlight this, is that and there's another question here: do cities implementing this type of cycling infrastructure also create education videos, social marketing campaigns for drivers, as well as cyclists, e-scooters, mobility scooters? And the answer is yes, and we're going to be looking at that as part of the education, encouragement, and outreach portion of this project as well. So all of that is definitely those are great suggestions for us to include.
And keeping a bit of a fireside chat theme to this, David, not to put you on the spot, I know you're a member of the OTC. Like it would be great if municipalities avoid duplicating similar efforts. It doesn't really make sense, every single municipality trying to do the same thing. Do you see any movement toward coordination or any kind of working groups that might help out, or what are your thoughts on that?
For those of you, the OTC is called the Ontario Traffic Council, and it's an organization that is funded by municipalities in the province and is mostly designed to inform and actually educate municipal planners and designers and engineers and consultants like us. And it is a forum to share ideas, and consistency in design, whether it be pavement markings or signage or how we design intersections, is really, really important. So if you think about my conversation earlier with you, where we talked about narrowing travel lanes, when you have two municipalities side by side, and you have one municipality who's applying the new design guidance on the same road, and then the municipality to the south is using the old standard with wider lanes, you can see how it's not going to be that effective. It's really important that municipalities work together and be, applying consistent guidelines. The new bikeway design guide for Ontario that was published in 2021 is something that all municipalities are being asked to use and apply. So you should see the planning and design of cycling infrastructure in boulevard multi-use pathways, the way we design traffic signals and pedestrian crossings and cross rides that allow cyclists to cross, to be consistent across all municipalities going forward. And that was something that was really needed, because Brett makes a good point. A lot of municipalities, spent a lot of time and effort having to study these issues, thinking that they needed to have a design solution that was specific to them. But the reality is those design solutions have been figured out by others in many cases. Yes, how they are applied to a specific location or context, that's where good engineering judgment comes in, and city staff will have to make those decisions on a project by project basis. But there is consistency now that municipalities like Barrie can use and draw upon to redesign their streets and to deal with maintenance and to design and implement on and off-road cycling infrastructure and trails.
So there's a question that I just wanted to really quickly get to. So there was actually a request for us to show them how to use the mapping tool again. And so I just wanted to, I'm going to put in one of the answers. There's a question here from Kevin, and it just says, but it's an important corridor to the southwest. I'm not sure which of the corridors you were speaking of there. The poor condition of Essa Road. I'm going to put an answer in there, and it's just going to be actually the link to the Building Barrie website. So sorry for hijacking your question, but I will do that so you can actually use that link. And what you can do, I'll show you as a quick screen share here what the Building Barrie project site looks like. So when you go to the Cycle Barrie website here, you scroll down to the bottom and you'll see the mapping tool. And so the mapping tool will have all of the different corridors that you'll be able to see here. So you see the purple is...
Actually, you're not showing your screen there, Justin.
I am not showing my screen. I didn't click the share button because apparently I'm still stuck in 2020 and I haven't been doing this for 2 years. So you'll see that there are the different line types. We're just getting we need to get the, oops, what happened there? That was weird. I think I just zoomed up to Flesherton for some reason. Okay, so let's go into Barrie. So you can zoom in on the facilities here, and you can use, there's a little plus button here. You just click on add pin, and you basically just click that and drag it over to wherever you want, and then you drop that pin, and you can do whatever comment you want. If you have an image that illustrates a particular thing that you'd like to share with us, maybe a poor pavement condition or any of those other considerations or a key gap, you can add an image and then just make sure you click submit. Otherwise, it will actually not allow you to, it won't show up unless you click submit. So I'll just,
Justin, just stay on the screen and leave that where you are. Don't move the map. So one of the questions is about Sunnydale and the overpass. Brett, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Let me just see the question. I was looking at the Justin's map work there.
Right, with the Sunnydale road overpass scheduled for a few years out and a linking road for the main Simcoe County loop, will Sunnydale Road as a whole, including the overpass, be reviewed in this project?
Yeah, so Sunnydale is being reconstructed with additional deck width for bicycle lanes. The segment of Sunnydale down to Wellington Street's wide enough to accommodate bicycling lanes as is. To the north, the road gets a little tricky to accommodate with the existing platform. This would be one of those roads where we, I recall what the recommended solution at this time was for that, but I know we were looking at bike lanes, but we ran into issues with the cross-section width of the roadway. But that would be one where we might look at a future corridor study for ultimate kind of cycling infrastructure. But at this time, I'll defer to WSP to see if they can recall what was recommended on that segment.
Yeah, honestly, I can't remember. It is a constrained corridor. I think we were talking about initially edge lines and then looking at how to better accommodate the cycling infrastructure.
Yeah, so send me an email directly and I'll respond to you.
I like one of the last questions because we're almost at the end of our time, and it's a really great question. I'm glad someone asked it. Do all cycling retrofits or build-outs need to maintain traffic study level service of vehicles that prioritizes automobile movement? It's a great question. So actually, there are new guidance in Ontario called multimodal level service guidelines that have just been published by an organization called the Ontario Traffic Council that's designed for municipalities to use. And it is a new method of calculating level of service for the movement of people on roadways, not just by cars, but by foot, by bike, and by public transit. And it shifts sort of the mode. So it's related to the kind of street. They call it street typology, whether it's a main street or a collector street, a residential street, an arterial road street, the kind of uses that are on that street, whether it's in an industrial area with lots of heavy truck traffic, or it's on a location that connects to a highway, which is a major commuter corridor to and from. It takes all that information and it adjusts the level of service targets. So roadways that are more focused and more ideal for accommodating bikes and pedestrians, the level of service motor vehicle traffic will be higher, meaning that a level of congestion for cars during certain times of a day during the week is acceptable, because the goal is to provide a better balance on that particular roadway to better accommodate the movement of pedestrians and cyclists. So many municipalities will start to be embracing these new guidelines as we go forward. The new transportation master plan for Barrie, I am sure, will be spending a lot of time and effort looking at these new design guidelines that were just published recently in 2021 to better understand how they're making their planning decisions. But like Brett said, even with that, there will still need to be a demand over time as Barrie grows to expand the road network to accommodate the movement of traffic and commercial vehicles. So it's a balance, but it's an excellent question. I'm glad it was asked. And I think maybe we should probably be wrapping up, Justin. We're at the end of our time, and I'm amazed that everyone stuck with us. We really thank you for that. And I'll let Justin sort of do the wrap up.
Yeah, so I just want to just recognize that there are a few different questions still remaining in the Q&A, and rest assured that we will be providing responses to those. on the project website. So you go to buildingbarrie.ca/cyclebarrie, and that's where you'll find, we're going to upload the video from this presentation. We're going to upload the PowerPoint deck, so you'll be able to access that in PDF format. So you'll be able to see all of the information that we've presented to you here tonight, and we'll be responding to those questions and providing consistent updates on that website. So that's really going to be your one-stop shop as we move forward with this project. I want to say a really significant thank you to everyone who spent time with us this evening. We recognize that this is an hour and a half on your Thursday night, and so for you to take that amount of time to be here and have that conversation with us, we just really value your expertise and your experience and your comments and your thoughtful question and discussion. This has just really been a fantastic experience for all of us, and we're really excited to continue to work with the City of Barrie to move forward as it becomes a better place for people who walk and bike. I'll turn it over to Brett for the final word, and we'll close the webinar off.
No, thanks, Justin, and thanks everyone for participating. Yeah, this is an exciting project, but it's just one of many parallel streams where we're building active transportation infrastructure here at the city. Again, this is kind of focusing on our quick win network as we in parallel build out our bigger capital projects. We've got some exciting ones that are happening this year with the completion of Bell Farm Road. We have Big Bay Point between Fairview and Huronia that's going to be completed this year, and that with bicycle infrastructure. And then shortly Bryn, the southern section. And actually I've been able to work with the infrastructure team to actually move from on-road. We were able to catch that early enough in design to move to cycle tracks. We're actively working with a consultant to examine that transition. So that's really exciting news. And just on kind of final notes is as I mentioned previously, the transportation master plan starting up in 2023. That's going to be a really exciting journey, and I hope everyone participates. We're really going to be looking at some new ideas. We're going to be starting out with a series of background discussion papers to set the framework of where we want to go and get a lot of input from the community, not really from the basis of where we take our core transportation master plan. So that's going to be about a 3-year project in length. So it's lengthy, but it's definitely an exciting project, and that's going to guide us to 2051. So really hope you folks come out and participate in that. And I'll likely be able to use the email list from this project to engage you folks when that actually happens. So that's another benefit of this as well. But again, thank you for your time. And just as a reminder, I believe a fall PIC will be scheduled just to wrap up this project with some recommendations. So we look forward to seeing you at that as well.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night. And we thank you again for participating on behalf of the City of Barrie and our team at WSP. Good night.
Good night.
Take care. Bye-bye.